If you have been a believer in Jesus Christ for any length of time, you've probably been told it is important to share your faith. And I would agree. It is important for every follower of Jesus, for every person who professes to be a Christian, to be focused on sharing their faith with other people. All of us are called to be evangelists in our own lives, to share the gospel in a manner that is clear and compelling for those we interact with. Now, as we approach the topic of evangelism training, I know that there are a whole host of reactions. Whenever you say something like, I'm going to teach you how to share the gospel, or you use a term like evangelism training, you get a variety of reactions or emotions that rise up inside of people. Sometimes people get excited because they want to be trained on evangelism and how to articulate the gospel. Other times you get people who get really, really nervous, maybe some sort of emotion of fear. If that's you, I want you to know that's okay. By the end of this online course, we're going to give you the tools and some of the tips and techniques that you can utilize to be effective in sharing the gospel. In recent times, there have been a variety of curriculums and training methods that have been really, really popular. Things like evangelism explosion and lay witness training. I am not going to tell you which one of these is the best. There are a variety of ways. In fact, rarely would we say there's a wrong way to share the gospel if you are committed to making sure you share it at all. That's the biggest lesson I think we ought to take away is all of us are called to share the gospel. And regardless of what method or model you choose to embrace, it's important that all of us be committed to articulating the gospel message to those that need to hear it. The primary goal of this online course is to make gospel sharing quite simple. The last thing I'll say before we move on from this segment is there's this idea, this sentiment that is popular that I think is important to address. You may have heard this famous quote that is quite frequently attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, and whether or not St. Francis actually said this quote is a matter of dispute. But regardless, you've probably heard the quote, and it goes something like this: always preach the gospel and use words when necessary. Now, I completely understand the sentiment behind that quote, the idea that in everyday life and every moment of every day, we should be living in a manner that represents the gospel. We should be behaving in a way that shows that we believe and love Jesus. We should be interacting with people in a way that shows them that we are people that maybe are different than the rest of our culture. However, I think there's a significant danger or pitfall with that particular quote. The reality is, eventually you're going to have to open your mouth. There's this sentiment out there that people would say, oh, you don't have to actually share the gospel with your mouth. You don't have to open up your mouth and say anything. Just live it. Just love people really well, and eventually they'll just see it in you. Or they'll ask you a question. They'll say, oh, tell me what you believe. Now, that idea sounds great, but quite frankly, my experience teaches me that's not reality. The reality is most people may think you're a really nice person, or they may see something different in you, but rarely, if ever, will they actually come to you and say, can you tell me what you believe? Tell me about this thing you believe and what makes you so different. Now, some of you watching this may say to yourself, Kenny, what are you talking about? I had that happen to me last week. If that's the case, praise God. That's awesome. And it may happen on occasion. It actually has indeed happened to me in my life. The reality is, it doesn't happen nearly as frequently as some people would like you to believe. Yes, I agree with that quote that we should always be preaching the gospel with our lifestyle, with our behaviors, with the way we treat people, with the way we interact and engage with people in everyday life. Absolutely, I agree. The gospel should indeed govern and inform how we treat people and how we behave on an everyday basis. However, the reality is there's going to come a time when we need to open our mouth and share the gospel. There's going to come a time where we need to open our mouth and articulate what we believe and why we believe it. And that happens far, far more frequently than people would like to believe. You can't just live it. You have to live it and you have to proclaim it. That's the goal of this online course, to give you some wisdom, some robust theology, as well as some practical tips and techniques on how to do that well.